online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
Play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
This is your Shock Radio News show at just gone 7 o'clock. Here's your headlines. Donald Trump has spoken to the presidents of Ukraine and Russia and says both want to make peace with negotiations to begin immediately. The US president has held separate phone calls and says he's committed to ending what he calls a ridiculous war. A judge-led public inquiry is going to be held into the Nottingham stabbing attacks that happened in June 2023. The Prime Minister met the families of the victims early today and said proceedings will start in a matter of weeks. After pleading guilty to 6 charges relating to the deaths of 3 babies, an NHS trust has been fined £1.6 million. Nottingham University Hospitals accepted it failed in quality care of 3 mothers and their children. A coroner's ordered a full inquest into the death of the Vivian. The post-mortem testing found that RuPaul's drag race star died from unnatural cause last month. And Everton manager David Moyes hopes for an intense atmosphere can help this team to a victory in their last ever Merseyside derby at Goodison Park tonight. They're aiming to win consecutive games against their rivals for the first time since 1985.
Shock Radio weather.
Weather tonight remaining cloudy this evening with hill fog lingering across the mountains, dry for most with the occasional spot of rain in places, but clearer skies developing overnight with the occasional widespread frost, a low of 2 degrees for Manchester. Well, this is your Shock Radio News show with Alfie Garner, Benny Fiddimore and Noah Buckingham-Reed. How are you guys today?
Fantastic.
Good. Always lots to talk about.
Plenty to talk about today. We'll start with Labour. Over the past week, a Labour MP has been sacked as a junior health minister, with himself and another MP being suspended over a message in the same WhatsApp chat. The first was Health Minister Andrew Gwynn, MP for Gorton and Denton. The second was Oliver Ryan, MP for Burnley. What do we think of this? Because this has obviously come out over the weekend. It came out from the Mail on Sunday. They did an investigation and told Downing Street over the weekend. What does this mean?
Well, Mr. Gwynn has definitely made unacceptable comments here. Joking about a pensioner constituent dying, sexist remarks about Angela Rayner, racist remarks about Diane Abbott, all things that should not be said, all things that are completely wrong and unethical. So it doesn't look good for him, and obviously he represents Labour. Not quite a cabinet position, but a junior minister. So, I mean, not just a backbencher as well. So it doesn't paint a good picture for Labour here.
It's been calamity after calamity for Labour, sort of since they came in, really. And I think it's just another scandal of the month, something that puts them sort of at the top of the headlines for the reasons they don't want to be at the top of the headlines. But again, it's sort of these anti-Semitic comments, which I think are most interesting, which we found out of this. Obviously, these other things and the immediate action that's been taken. Keir Starmer came into this government with a very hard line. He wanted to remove any sort of ideas of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. It was a massive part of his leadership push, and it's going to be a massive part of this government. And again, the quick action which he's taken, another thing, we've seen it before with Louise Haigh, who went after sort of quite a low-level historical thing. It's obviously, I think, a much more higher scale, a wider scale, and something that should be massively sort of thought about, and they've taken quick action. So I think it should set the precedent, but it has put Labour at the top of headlines for the wrong reasons.
It has. Let's give a bit more context. Andrew Gwynn is a 50-year-old. He was appointed health minister in summer after the election, and he was previously the campaign chief for Jeremy Corbyn. He was part of this WhatsApp group containing Labour councillors, party officials, and at least one other MP that we know of. And you said it there, he made anti-Semitic comments and joked about a pensioner consultant saying he hoped she died before the next election. In the chat, he also made some racist comments about Diane Abbott and sexist comments about Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, according all to the Mail on Sunday. As we said, it sort of sets this precedent within, especially for the constituents at heart here, of whether or not they can trust their MP, doesn't it?
Definitely does, because with it being like their elected representative, they've voted for this person in good faith, thinking that they're going to represent them well. Clearly, this isn't a good representation for Gorton and Denton. So this is not good for them, knowing that their MP feels this way. Or, we don't know, at least is willing to make comments, even if it's a jokey comment or whatever. That he's willing to think it's acceptable to make these sorts of remarks. And for people who vote for this person, are meant to be served by this person, they're probably feeling very let down.
It's quite highly shocking, the comments, I think, as well. And especially we've wanted to see a unity in this Labour government. We wanted to see some sort of cohesion within the party on a messaging and a government. We said that when Labour came in, the adults are coming in here. This is a grown-up government, this government who are accountable for their decisions. And what this suggests is that that isn't fully rooted out in the party. We know these are private WhatsApp groups. These things weren't said in public domains. These things, But I think that's the sort of dimension we live in now. These sort of scandals, while they might have been caught on a microphone before, these things are now caught on WhatsApp groups and watching what they have to say online. And I think what Labour have to try and avoid here is trying to create division in the party. That's something which they don't want to have. They want to make sure that this is a hardline decision. We can see that the whip will be removed, that the party members will be suspended. What that means for their actual roles going forward, I don't think it's exactly clear yet. But I hope for the sake of having a cohesive and, like you said, having a representative which they voted for, which they put their trust into, that can then be handed back. And that's what Labour have to really try and do. We've seen it in the wider spectrum of Labour and their trust in government and how they've had this quite rocky start. What they have to do here is put their feet down, I think.
So for this situation, it's a way for Keir Starmer to really define how he's going to lead. And I think there's two ways you can look at this. So the first way is you can think, obviously, this is a former Jeremy Corbyn campaign chief. In the Jeremy Corbyn days, the Labour Party was plagued with anti-Semitism, and some might argue that Jeremy Corbyn didn't do enough to tackle that anti-Semitism. So with him being appointed a health minister, being in a senior role and then making these comments, it's almost, you could look at it and think, well, Keir Starmer hasn't sorted the anti-Semitism problem out fully yet, and it's still plagued within the Labour Party. Or you can have a look at it and see, well, he's immediately been sacked as a health minister, so Keir Starmer is acting in the ways that perhaps Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't have done in the past. So that means that Labour, maybe they are a change party, and any sign of this anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic behaviour will not be tolerated, and these people will be dealt with immediately.
Well, we talked about it a little bit before. Is a lot of this came down to Diane Abbott, of racist comments being made. She has come out today to say the Prime Minister has done the right thing by suspending the MPs over the comments. Let's listen now.
Anybody who was on that WhatsApp group and understood what was said should really have stepped down. They were offensive remarks, and in 2025, people should know better.
And it brings up that argument, doesn't it? It's like Diane Abbott has said there, Keir Starmer's done the right thing. We should be able to look around and trust these MPs to not be saying these things about not only their constituents but their colleagues in Parliament.
But in general, to be honest, because at the end of the day, an MP is meant to be they're called the Right Honourable, aren't they? They're meant to be honourable people who serve the public. If they have these sorts of views, they represent their whole constituency. And to represent a constituency in that way is really quite insulting to the people, and this is Gorton here, to present yourself in that sort of manner and to allow this to kind of be public knowledge as well. It's just quite embarrassing. So if you're an MP, then of course you should be behaving in a reputable manner. And obviously this has been a problem for so many years in the Labour Party, anti-Semitism. They've been working hard to tackle it. So people know about this. This isn't just like a joke remark, a foolish banter remark. People know that this is a massive issue. And so for MPs to still be making these sorts of comments just casually to other colleagues as well in what's meant to be a professional setting, it just doesn't make much sense in 2025.
I think Diane Abbott's been sort of a key sort of centre role at a lot of these discrepancies in the right and left of the Labour Party. I think it comes down to these sort of internal fights as well. Diane Abbott's been at the centre of this before. She's now at the centre again. What does this say currently about the Labour Party? It's a difficult question, I think, to answer. But where Diane Abbott stands, and within that, we've seen that she has clashed with Keir Starmer. There has been right and left clashes. And what Starmer needs to do now, and I think this is the right decision, and it will be, as we just heard from Diane Abbott, that this is going to be something which she agrees on too, that they are unified in this, and hopefully that can sort of resonate within the party, the wider party, that this is an issue now which they can put behind them, and hopefully
and unify against it as well.
Exactly.
Well, Andrew Gwynn isn't the only person. Oliver Ryan is another MP. He became MP in July during the election. He was previously a Tameside councillor. He's also been investigated by the Labour Party over comments made in the same WhatsApp group, and it was announced that he was suspended from the party. In a statement on social media, he said he apologised for the comments he made and would not make them again, and would fully cooperate with the investigation being held by the party. Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, said it's pretty swift action from the Labour Party.
We understand that he met with the Chief Whip, Sir Alan Campbell, and was informed of the decision. Now, tell us your side of the story. What have you got to say for us? Informed of the decision, told straight away he was suspended.
So it was a straight decision. It wasn't something that took a while. It was straight away. Does that also suggest something about Keir Starmer's direction in the Labour Party, that he's quick on this stuff? He very quickly sort of goes towards this and says, we won't have this anymore. We're going to suspend you for investigation.
It sets a precedent for zero tolerance, and it's a good way of making an example to other MPs to think, if you're going to act like this, you don't belong in this party. And in that way, by setting that precedent, that's the way to filter out racists, anti-Semitics, sexists in the party, because they'll know that if they are found to be doing this, which in this day and age you will be found out if you make comments like this in WhatsApp groups, then you're not going to have a future. So it basically says to them, well, if we're going to be like this, then this isn't the party for us.
Right, and I think this has been an issue which they have cracked down on quickly, but we understand it's not a singular issue. It's not one person. We know it's been a couple people. We understand that there's been 11 councillors suspended in Greater Manchester as part of this. This is, it's not a singular issue. It's something Labour which it may be still sort of inherent in the party, and that's something which Keir Starmer can't see as a problem, which is over. He's got to keep on moving at it.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it there. 11 councillors in Greater Manchester. The suspensions relate to the membership of the group. It's called Trigger with Timbers. It was set up to coordinate Labour campaigning in the local area. We don't know why the councillors have been suspended, as Labour hasn't announced it yet, and they haven't presented any evidence that the councillors posted any offensive message at this point. All we know is they were part of the group. Let's move on, though, to something else that's happening within the Labour Party as well, but also within Parliament. Kim Leadbeater is the MP who proposed the assisted dying bill, has set out a new proposal this week, removing the need for a High Court judge to sign off the request. The Labour MP will move forward an amendment to the Terminally Ill Act End of Life bill that was backed by MPs in November. In November, it was backed 330 MPs in favour to 275 against. The previous plans saw terminally ill adults, mentally competent, and within 6 months of their lives have the option to choose assisted dying. What does this mean for this whole debate around assisted dying? Does it mean that we're going to see sort of new opposition come into it, or are we just going to say it's going to keep passing through Parliament?
There's obviously, whenever there's an amendment made, a potential for split. And I think there's two ways again of looking at this. First of all, you can, if you think of her point of view, this is going to be a lot of, the word is red tape, I suppose, when it comes to choosing to end your own life. It's going to take a long, long time, to the point where it's probably not worth it for some people. So I get what she's saying there, with the fact that they kind of want to take out some of that red tape and make it a bit less, hard to do it. However, at the same time, this is a massive change from anything this country has really seen before. So I can imagine that there will be people who may well have been on the fence of voting for or against it, but may have ended up voting for it because there's such a big process involved. Who are now thinking, well, the process is being stripped back and it's such a massive change. Maybe we feel a bit more uncomfortable about it now.
I think we look back on when this was voted through towards the end of last year, and it was quite a major parliamentary moment. It's sort of one of those hailed as one of those days where we see our parliamentary democracy at its best. Kim Leadbeater, the sister of the murdered MP Jo Cox. I think there's an emotional element to that. But now we're sort of further down the line, and these divides are very sort of politicised again. We saw it kind of depoliticised around the time. We saw that the previous plans saw terminally ill adults, mentally competent and with 6 months to live, have the option to choose assisted dying. This would, again, sort of adapt that. And like you said, it does leave the opportunity for split now. Will there be split? I think there will be, and I'm not sure this might be the best move to ensure that there's unity and that this bill can continue to be put through the parliamentary system and become law. This adds sort of something, a barrier which people will sort of use, and I think we've seen it in already from some opposition, that this is going to be something which is used as a combat to the idea by saying that these walls are too low, there is chances for coercion here. This debate has been hashed out, but this is going to be potentially another divisive element to it.
Yeah, well, the previous plans was that you'd go through the whole process, and at the end of it, a High Court judge would sign it off whether or not it would be allowed by the courts. The new proposal still involves doctors to sign off the request, no longer going straight to a High Court judge. Instead, it goes to a panel of experts to review every application, chaired by senior legal figures, but not necessarily a judge. It would also include experts like psychiatrists and social workers, and the decision could be reviewed by the High Court. So the High Court's not being taken away completely, it's just not being put as an immediate step. The panel would also be chosen by a voluntary assisted dying commission led by a High Court judge. Let's find out more about this plan, because Kemley Leadbeater outlined the plans further, defending the change in the bill. She thought a judge having the final word could work, but new evidence sort of says against us. Let's have a listen.
We took evidence from the Association of Palliative Care Social Workers, for example, and we took evidence from psychiatrists. And I think what came through in the evidence was the need for a multidisciplinary approach. I think legal oversight is really important, but I think that multidisciplinary approach could actually enhance the bill even further.
So she says it enhances the bill rather than sort of degrades it. Ministers and officials also been closely consulted on the change, although the government technically remains neutral on the bill. We saw that during the previous vote. You know, none of the whips, no whips in the government. Does that suggest a change? Can we see a change, or do you think Keir Starmer was just going to say it's a personal issue rather than a political issue?
I think that's why it was such a historic vote, because there were no party lines or party influences. I mean, I think we said at the time that, Keir Starmer voted for it, and Angela Rayner, his number 2, his deputy, voted against it. So it was really clear that it was definitely an individual vote. The problem with this is that it just adds an extra layer of complexity to the whole situation. And obviously this was going to take years to kind of formulate into proper law. And having a new amendment makes it even more likely to be prolonged, and more likely there'll be delays. And there'll probably be people thinking, or MPs questioning, whether it really is worth it with all these different complex amendments going on. And so, yeah, I don't know. It may change some people's minds. Again, like I said before, it's people on the fence. I don't think the government are going to make it clear to their MPs you've got to vote one way or the other. And I think that's the same across all parties, actually.
I do feel this is a setback massively for Leadbeater's cause. I understand where she's coming from. I think everybody understands where she's coming from on this. But this is an easy way for people to go, this is now not what we were promised. This is not what was proposed. This is not what we voted on. We're not going to change this. And again, it could just add another layer where these amendments, where she's going to propose her own amendments to the already being negotiated amendments. And what people found confidence in, I think, the first time we heard the vote, was that there were these massively high barriers, right? And these would essentially be in place for those people who were less sure about passing the bill to vote on it. Now going back on this would effectively divide some of that vote again. And for somebody who does want this to go through, I think it's quite the statement to make.
Yeah, well, Leadbeater stated judge will still be a crucial part of the process, but plans will ease the court's capacity to hear each case.
We'd end up with what you might call a judge plus model, because I think we also need to look at who else should maybe be involved in those conversations. And the social workers I've spoken to were very clear that, particularly when it comes to things like detecting coercion, that's what they're trained to do.
Meanwhile, there's been defence of the former plans that was put through Parliament before Christmas. The former MP, Tom Hunt, said the change is substantial.
This High Court safeguard, at the second reading, it was one of the key things. It was meant to see, this is what makes our bills safer than anywhere else in the world. I mean, there it is. puff of smoke, gone, just like that.
Well, let's move on now. It's an interesting story we'll keep following, I'm sure. Let's move on, though, to the Ukraine war, because within the last few hours, the US President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, have been having talks with each other on the phone. The pair agreed to start negotiations immediately on ending the war in Ukraine. Let's give a bit of background, though, over what's happened over the last 3 years. It started on the 24th of February with Russia wanting to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Putin described it at the time as a special military operation, and then sort of went into capturing, because in May 2022, Russia captured Mariupol after a 3-month siege. Kiev estimated that 20,000 civilians were killed during the siege. This has had a big effect. You know, we've been talking about the Ukraine war since it started back in 3 years ago. What does this mean now we've got sort of consensus on both sides? What do we think could happen from this?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see what exactly happens, but I think there's definitely going to be American influence. We heard from Trump after the election that he was going to end the Ukraine war on day one. That hasn't happened. However, this looks like it's the first step to a sort of ceasefire and maybe an agreement. Maybe both sides will have to make compromises. The truth is, Russia haven't got complete control because they've been fighting for it for 3 years and they haven't successfully done it. So there's any thought that Ukraine won't have a say in the negotiations, I don't think is correct. I think they'll definitely have some sort of say in what happens. I feel like both sides will have to compromise, but at this moment in time, I think it's time to think about how it's costing a lot of money, it's costing a lot of Russian lives in terms of the army. Ukraine have also got to think, well, is it worth continuously exhausting our soldiers, putting our civilians at risk? Isn't it just time now to accept we've been at a stalemate for so many years, we need to find a long-term solution? And whether that means we have to give Putin some of what he wants, so be it. Is it for the economic reasons? Is it for humanitarian purposes? I know, Noah, you have a slightly different view on this, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think we talk about it in very diplomatic terms. We give a lot of grace to Russia in a similar way which we've given grace to sort of the aggressive side in conflicts. What the negotiation is with, what the consequences of this for each side. What Ukraine are essentially giving up here is sovereign land. This is sovereign European land, not too far from us, not too far from where we see our closest allies. What Trump is describing here as a settlement, an immediate end to the war in Ukraine, he sees that end to the war in a giving up of sovereign land, of a drawing of a new borders, of the maps on your wall changing. That is a massively internationally violating, or should be violating, of both the European Union's and, of course, Britain's moral standpoint, and also in the confines of law. It happens anywhere else, it'd be massively shocking for a sovereign country, to expect to give up land. This is what Trump is essentially supporting. This is what he is enabling to happen, and this is what is going to happen on European soil. I don't think we'd ever see the day of just a few years ago, we're coming from the third anniversary, where we'd see a sovereign European country giving up land to a fascist dictatorship state.
And obviously we can't confirm any of that at the moment because it's still in negotiations. It's only just started, but we will have to look towards what happens throughout the process. We'll also, let's remind ourselves, in March 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian officials, and that included Putin. They said it was for war crimes of allegedly deporting Ukrainian children from the occupied territory. So it's a big part of the issue is this sort of international reaction as well. Trump held talks with Putin and Zelensky, both which lasting over an hour. The new defense secretary in the US, Pete Hegseth, was talking at the Brussels Defence Summit. He said it was unrealistic to expect Ukraine to return to its pre-2014 borders and downplayed the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO.
Our relationship will prioritize empowering Europe to own responsibility for its own security.
So he's saying there that Europe has this responsibility, not the US. So he's kind of passing off that responsibility to other allies of Ukraine, isn't he?
I think the easiest way to interpret this is a few years ago, it wouldn't have even been imaginable that the US would be sort of regurgitating these Russian talking points from the Kremlin. This is a Russian talking point. This is a key talking point from Putin. This is what he said when he started the war. It is sort of turning these arguments which he made for making this territorial sort of ambition which he had, and turning it around that it was actually a war for Europe to fight. This was not a war. That this is a battle between two nations, right? This is, but I think this is actually what the US are now implying, is that this is exactly what the Kremlin want people to think, what they want the US to think, they want the other European countries to think, that this is a war between two nations. It's not something that the European Union or the NATO should be getting involved in.
It's an interesting one, because we've already seen the new kind of US foreign policy in the last couple of weeks. It's very clear that America wants to be America and let the whole world kind of run itself. I don't think it wants, in this new presidency, in the second Trump term, it seems to be very much laissez-faire, and it's more kind of, you need to look after yourselves now. We're not going to back you and influence you and give you loads of money to survive. And I think this, if they with this idea that, you know, they're going to cut what Ukraine once had as a border, it sets a worrying precedent for the rest of the continent and in fact the rest of the world, because at the end of the day this sets the precedent that Putin can have what, or any dictator can kind of have what they want, and if the Americans don't if they don't intervene and give that support, then it's going to be harder. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how the negotiations turn out.
Yeah, well, the UK is obviously going to probably take some responsibility for this. The British Defence Secretary John Healey says the group he will help out force Putin out of the negotiating table and force him onto it by backing Kiev troops with equipment. He's backing Ukrainians, saying unity is key and all of NATO have a role to play in this.
On stepping up for Ukraine, we are and we will. On stepping up for European security, we are and we will. And you've just spoken about peace through strength. We are 50 nations strong here, all determined to put an end to Putin's war.
The UK is also expected to spend $4.5 billion on military aid for Ukraine by the end of this year, and $150 million on new firepower, including drones, tanks and missiles. It's something that we're going to have to keep looking back and forth on as this story develops over the Shock News Show, over the rest of this year for sure. So we'll keep in touch with this. But thank you both for joining me so far. At just gone 7:30, let's get a quick reminder of your headlines.
Online, on the TuneIn app,
And on your smart speaker.
play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
Donald Trump has filled the Ukrainian president in on a phone call he had with Vladimir Putin, where they agreed to begin negotiations on ending the war immediately. The US president written online, "God bless the people of Russia and Ukraine," and claims that leaders of both countries want peace. A judge-led inquiry to scrutinise the agency involved in the mental health care of Nottingham killer Vladimir Kalkane. It's something his victims' families have been calling for. An NHS trust has been fined more than £1.5 million for maternity care failings, in which led to the deaths of 3 babies. Nottingham University Hospital has been charged for a second time, but insists it's improved. The anti-terror prevent programme has been found to have shut the case of Sir David Amos killers too early. The MP was stabbed to death in 2021 by a man who's been referred there twice. And we're told that no public money will fund a third runway at Heathrow. The airport bosses expect it to be built by 2035. That was your Shock Radio News Show with Alfie Garner, Noah Buckingham-Reed and Benny Fiddimore. This week's show was produced by Luke Jones and directed for Shock TV by Aaron Walkden, and we'll be back next week.